nothing unites the internet quite like pure hatred. So the fact we're covering something people dislike, I think it's going to be an interesting response. We have already got a pretty interesting response so far.
And we should add to this as well. This is our viewers, our followers' most disliked films. It doesn't necessarily mean it's our 3 most disliked films, which I think it kind of adds an extra layer, because it would be easy to choose a film each we all dislike, but to bring in the audience, to bring in that participation and see why exactly people dislike these films, rather than it just us 3 weirdos, pontificating about them.
It was actually a really interesting collection of bad films, or what people had labeled as bad films. And there's a lot of folks there were a lot of titles on there that people were quite offended at, that were on there as bad films. So, we went out there and we looked towards all the listeners, and people who followed us on X or Twitter or whatever it's called, Instagram, and everything else. And what was come up with was kind of an unusual group of movies. There's a few like usual suspects of bad movies, but there's some that really offended folks that ended up on this list.
Well, it really demonstrated the subjectivity of films, because there was some on that list, like you say, Phil, usual suspects. If you're going to talk about the worst films ever, there's a bunch of names that come up. But looking through some of the films people nominated, I looked at it and I thought, okay, look, I understand people have their opinions, but I've literally never heard that called like the most hated film or the most disliked film. And I love going through the comments on like the polls where like one film really ran away with it. And someone's like, wait, this is a bad film? Nobody told me this.
Well, I think that comes into one of the films we're going to be discussing today, because it is actually a revered modern genre film. So I was really surprised by some of the choices that came up in these lists. And you find out interesting things when you put it forth into the internet about certain things. Things you maybe never even thought about before. But, that's the way it goes, and that's what audience participation brings. So, okay, Wayne, let's introduce it. Our followers' 4th pick, what is it?
The 4th worst picture, according to our audience, and this is going to surprise a lot of people if you didn't see the posts, if you didn't see the polls, the 4th most disliked film is none other than Damien Leone's Terrifier from 2016.
I could absolutely. This is what I was hinting at before. I could not believe this made the list. I thought genuinely everybody loved this film, but I'm sitting across from 2 people who don't really like it either.
No.
So what the hell has happened? Was it all marketing and was it all promotion? I thought this was like, the horror fan cinematic wet dream come true.
Well, I think you actually just kind of stated it there with the word promotion. For me, the reason I think a lot of people dislike this movie, not necessarily the content, I think it's the promotion of it, the advertising of it, the fact that this Art the Clown became almost like kind of a new cultural phenomenon, and the fact it was just always there. It's what I'd almost call like the Taylor Swift effect, or like the Conor McGregor effect. These people who are always in the news and you have to hear about them all the time, and whether you think about them, good or bad, the fact they're always there, the fact it feels like they're being shoved down your throats constantly. I mean, I heard of Terrifier because it went, viral, as we say, and everybody was talking about it, and it was hyped up like it was the next stage in horror films. It's like, wow, this has come along and it's revolutionized the genre. I watched it last year. I wasn't that high on it, honestly. I didn't really care about it that much. I didn't dislike it. I didn't hate it, unlike our number 3 entry. But for me, this was just kind of a mediocre film. And they're not as much fun to talk about as properly disliked films, but I can totally understand what people like about Terrifier and dislike about it. But fundamentally, I think the fact it was so heavily promoted and people still talk about it so much as being basically the second coming, I think that puts a lot of people off.
Yeah, and I think just to back up a little bit, the question about it, these are very personal opinions to people, and what is a bad movie? This is part of the thing I wanted to go into some depth with on my website and talking about this topic. What exactly is a bad movie? And it's like, what is a good movie? What's your favorite movie? You had me on last time to talk about Black Christmas, and people will go, I've had people go, that's your favorite movie of all time? And it's like, that's a very personal thing. Sometimes it's the setting. It was the time you saw it. It's what it meant to you. And I think that's the other thing in the bad movie. If maybe you're having a bad day, you watch this movie, or it it was relating to a topic that was in your life that really bothered you, and you're like, this, it was offensive to you, or there's a certain aspect to it that's going to be more offensive to you than perhaps other viewers. So what I was looking at in terms of bad movies, and you've mentioned it before, Wayne, is there's a lot of different types of bad movies. One thing that about bad movies that I want to make clear is that if it is entertaining, it's not a bad movie. So that's the key to what folks like Mike McPadden and Matt Rotman have been saying for years, is that, yeah, like if you are entertained, if it's not well made and it's still good, it's like a greasy burger and it tastes good, it's a good greasy burger, right? So I think the movies that are bad are ones that are truly offensive. And I actually have broken them down into 4 categories. I can go through them real quick, promise, real quick. And then we'll talk. That way I can tell you where I think Terrifier ends up on this list. Okay. So there's really pretentious films that are kind of in love with themselves. They often talk down to the audience. Those are the ones that I just can't stand. Those are bad movies. And those are movies that are like Love Actually. I'm sorry. I know that's a movie in the UK.
I know Wayne hates this film.
I hate that movie so much. I just don't know how you feel about your prime minister dancing around like a fool, and the U.S. president looking like a lecherous idiot. Not that that's not true. We won't go into politics. But Love Actually, another movie that I saw recently, The Glass Onion. I watched this movie and I was like, okay, that was really well made. There's some good things in there, good acting, and it's really, really impressed with itself, isn't it? And it kind of turns you off, and it's offensive. The second category are the big budget, cynical money grabs, and that's like pretty much algorithm driven. All these sequels, remakes. Probably one of ours on this list is one of those. And a lot of stuff we're getting from MCU and Star Wars and all that. It's just too much. But they're trying to make money. The next one is highly self-aware movies that are made to be bad. Those actually offend me the most. Movies like the new Slumber Party Massacre, like it's just Thanksgiving. I know people love these movies. They're like, oh, they're supposed to be bad. Don't like it. I just find like waste of time.
If a film is bad, it needs to be bad in its own regard. It can't be in on the joke.
That's exactly right.
I want to say the same thing. It's the meta films. Like we've had this idea now, like meta films have been around for a while, but it's got to a point now where it feels like filmmakers can think that if they make a film and they acknowledge the film is bad, that's okay and it's self-aware. I'm like, no, you're making a shitty film. You simply acknowledging that it's a shitty film. That's like me cooking a really bad dinner, which I do a lot, by the way. That's like me cooking a really bad dinner, serving it to someone, and when they say they hated it, I'll be like, well, it was supposed to be bad all along. That doesn't make the food go down any easier.
Well, that's the charm of Tommy Wiseau's The Room, because he genuinely believed this was almost like an Oscar-worthy, A Streetcar Named Desire type of film. But after the release of The Room, when he realized people were laughing at it and not with it, he almost, restaged it in a sense, and it becomes a quote-unquote bad film. And now everything he's done post The Room is just crap. Yeah. And it's meant to be crap.
Yeah, The Room was a good movie until he said it was supposed to be a bad movie. Then it became a bad movie, right? So I think that's that other category.
You're like, Tommy, you are the joke. You're not supposed to be in on the joke.
That's correct.
You can kind of tell when filmmakers have an earnesty about it, like someone like Ed Wood, whose films are hilarious and inept. But that's exactly what you're saying, Phil. Those films are so horribly made, Ed Wood's films, but they are so entertaining. I laugh my ass off at Plan 9 every time. If it's entertaining, then yeah, I don't think you can properly call it a bad film in that sense.
Yeah, and the last category on there is one that, Wayne, you've said many times because you talk about the movie you hate the most. And I'll get it right. It's Monster A Go-Go. I believe you said that right. Okay, good. I'm glad. I think I got it right this time. Not the potato people having sex movie or whatever it was.
Did you ever watch that?
No, I don't even know how to get that. Don't even tell me how to get that movie. I'm not going to watch it. I'll watch the Serbian film before that movie, probably. But it's the boring movie, right? Like that. There's nothing worse than a boring bad movie.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'll be honest, when you said the potato people having sex, my mind just seriously spun a wheel there. I'm like, what the hell is Flicks talking about? Like, oh, Sex Lives of the Potato Men. I can see if you were going to count that as a bad movie, that would go in like kind of one of your early categories, like the kind of pretentious films or films that are just out there to be offensive. But yeah, Monster Go-Go, technically inept, but not technically inept to such a degree that it's enjoyable. Just no one cared making that film. Absolutely no one gave a shit.
The other thing I want to say is making movies are very difficult. And I don't think we mock the concept of people going out and trying to make movies. We're not making movies. I'm sure if we could, we've all had dreams of making our own movies. I want to be a screenwriter. It never happened. And it's just because Hollywood, they just don't get it, So, but anyway, but I think that, we all would love to be in the filmmaking business, and there would always be somebody that would hate us. So we don't take it. We're having fun with this, I guess, moving forward.
Well, to echo that sentiment, I was watching an interview with Patton Oswalt, the comedian and actor, and he was talking about some of his least favorite sci-fi movies, and he kind of said the same thing. He said, at this point in my life, I've made enough movies to where I know no matter how bad a film is, someone broke their back, someone shed blood, sweat, and tears
100%.
to get it made. So he doesn't entirely love trashing the film because you're trashing someone that someone worked very hard to bring to life. But he's like, but I'm still going to make fun of it.
Do you think there's something inherent in the sci-fi genre because it's dealing with such lofty ideals and it's, so different visually to anything else that there is more room to be a bad movie?
100%. I think when you look at something, I don't want to jump the gun too much, but you mentioned sci-fi. If you look at something like Battlefield Earth, and we'll probably talk about the budget for the interesting shrinking budget for Battlefield Earth. But sci-fi, you're automatically going to need some sort of budget, unless it's a very closed piece. If it has a wide scope, the writer, it's almost like I never wanted to write science fiction because it would never get made by some kind of some kind of screenwriter with no experience, because it just inevitably needs a big budget. And then when you have a small budget and you're trying to accomplish these big things, there is a problem usually that happens with that cocktail.
Well, especially like for sci-fi, you need to have an intelligence about you, a technological intelligence about you. Otherwise, your script just ends up with idioms such as man animal.
See, we're getting right into the poor Battlefield Earth. And every time, by the way, they say man animal in Battlefield Earth, I keep thinking of Manimal, which is a TV show from the 80s with Simon.
Me too.
I kept wanting Simon McCorkindale to come out and be a cyclo or something as like a guest appearance. If you get the Simon McCorkindale joke, by the way, we can be friends. But I'm sure there's only one listener that has any idea what I'm talking about. I actually wrote because I figured, some people haven't seen these movies and, we kind of jump into the movie. I decided it might be a good idea, if you guys will bear with me, to write a log line. So when you do screenplays, you want to pitch a screenplay in the business, they say, what's your log line? And it should be one concise sentence about your movie. Okay. Now you can do two, but if you do more than that, you're in trouble. So I tried to take the plot of Van Helsing, which I watched twice, to make sure I got all the nuances. Okay, so this is what I came up with. You guys, I want to hear your reaction here. Legendary monster hunter Gabriel Van Helsing is commissioned by the mysterious Knights of the Order to defeat Dracula's evil plan to harness the power of Frankenstein to raise his army of vampire children creatures from the dead to take over the world. Unfortunately, only werewolves can kill Dracula, so Van Helsing must become a werewolf first. And hey, don't forget there's Kate Beckinsale, vampire killer hottie, along for the ride. And oh yeah, Igor and Dr. Jekyll are in it too. And by the way, Van Helsing was the guy who killed Dracula 400 years ago, but forgot. So Dracula is really pissed about that too. Was that a good summary? It's very concise.
I think so.
It was. Flicks, when you put it like that, that movie makes absolutely no sense now.
Okay, so I'll say, I want to remind everybody, the first time we talked about this, the last episode or part one of this collaboration we're doing, I talked about 4 types of bad movies, right? So we had pretentious tripe, number 1, 2, cynical money grab, 3, boring, and then 4, trying to be bad, right? Like movie, we're just trying to be bad. Like, okay, then you're bad and we don't like you. to me, I don't really think it fits. The only one it's close to is The Money Grab because of the sort of pattern copycat of a very successful Mummy Returns. Now, this movie was a success at the box office. I think it made like $300 million, and they wanted to do a sequel. It never came together. I think it was partially because the actors probably weren't really into it. I think it's actually the real reason they ran out of monsters. Like, that was it. They're like, we can't top that. A sequel, everything has to be twice as much. As twice as many explosions. So this was successful at the box office. I don't know. I don't really think. I think, I quoted Matt Rotman, and he admitted to me, he's like, I like Van Helsing. I worked at Blockbuster, and it was continually playing the trailer of Van Helsing over and over again. And so you'd think I'd be sick of it. But he said he liked it. And again, I don't really think it fit any of those specific categories. So I'm going to give it a pass. I'm going to say, it is what it is. And it's cotton candy. I'm not telling you not to eat the cotton candy, but you're not really going to enjoy it afterwards, or you're not going to think about it ever again.
It's cotton candy, but it might be spiked cotton candy. We just don't know.
Well, if I could add an extra category, I'd say this is kind of the jangling the keys in front of your face kind of thing, where it's just so concerned with spectacle and everything being visual and everything being, oh, look at these flashy things and these imagery, things like that. The kind of thing where when you were younger, you thought it was cool because it was so much fun and all this awesome stuff happens, but when you grow up and you look back, it's like looking back at something like maybe like a poem you wrote when you were younger, which you thought was really clever and profound, but then you get old and like, I want to punch my young self in the face for thinking this was ever good.